the coffee break, and I want to confess that there was something that I slipped up on this morning when Sucharita, who has done such a marvelous job of uh, chairing the morning session, and I didn't even introduce her. So I thought I should do that first before I hand over the mic to her to introduce our next chair. So Sucharita Sengupta teaches political science at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Born in Ludhiana and brought up in Chandigarh, she completed her education from Lady Shri Ram College and Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has previously worked with the Indian Express, the Energy and Resources Institute, and University of Pennsylvania Institute for the Advanced Study of India, New Delhi. Her areas of interest include climate change, urbanization, and gender. She continues to have an abiding interest in all things literary. Thank you so much, Sucharita. This morning's session was a total delight. Please.
Thank you, Chandra. And Balan sir, now you know that I'm only a Bengali in name. Okay. Yes, you wanted me to publicly clarify, I have. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for reassembling. And I'm going to introduce the chair for our next session, who is a senior of mine from university, but also senior of mine from hostel and a very close friend. Dr. Madhumita Chakrabarti is Professor, Department of English, Zakir Hussain College, University of Delhi. She has over 2 decades of teaching experience at Delhi University and has authored or edited 7 books with publishers such as Macmillan, Akar Books, and Book Age Publications. She has also contributed book chapters in publications from Routledge, Worldview, etc., and published research articles in both national and international journals. She completed her PhD on Mahashruta Devi. Her most recent publication is as the editor of a volume titled Language, Literature, Culture, and Cinema, a collection of essays in honor of Professor Harish Narang, published in 2024. And currently, a compendium or a primer for the BA English Honours course, Introduction to Literary Studies, is in the press and is being published by Pearson. Her areas of specialization include diaspora, post colonial literatures, and popular culture. Madhumita Di, I now hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sucharita, for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Chandra, Adnan, and everybody else for this invite. Given the galaxy of reputed speakers we have here today, I find myself very, I don't know. I mean, in a position as to what do I say about translation? I mean, I I think for me, translation is a lived experience. Why do I say a lived experience? Is because in my house, in my home, we are translating every day, as happens when you are part of a family where the spouses don't speak the same language. So, from there on begins my story of translation because when my daughter was born, we took a conscious decision in a way to see that we all spoke Bengali at home for the first 2 years of her life. So that was me, my father, the domestic help, and my husband in the Tuta Futa Bengali that he spoke. He's from Bihar, so you know the Tuta Futa Bengali that he spoke. But that was a conscious decision that we took because we thought that if she was not acquainted with Bangla at this age of her life, she would actually lose her contact with one whole side of her family because English and Hindi would be languages she would pick up anyway once she started going to school. So, obviously, as happens with young children and especially with children with working parents, she used to watch a lot of cartoons, and she actually started picking up Hindi uh, through watching cartoons. So one fine day when I come home from work, she tells me in Shuddh Hindi, "Mama, मुझे माफ कर दीजिए, मुझसे बहुत बड़ी गलती हो गई." And I am like, where is this coming from? So the fact that she was able to pick up that very Shuddh Hindi that was being spoken in Doraemon and then take that into the context of having done something wrong and then bring it to me was something I found very fascinating at that age because she was only about 18 months old at the time and just about learning to form sentences and so on. So that is from where we understand, like, and I see, when I see her, I realize that how easily she translates between English to Hindi and Bangla. So another colleague of mine who also has this kind of a mixed background told me once that his daughter came and said that his daughter wanted to have a kolana. And, he was like, we were trying to figure out what kolana is. I mean, again, she was a toddler at that time. And it was only then that they figured out that she was talking about kola, as in Bengali kola, and banana, which together became kolana. And a new word was added to the register over there. And that often happens with children who are in such mixed language households. So, my second story about translation is from, again, a few decades earlier, because I just want to give a few stories before I hand on to this. Again, here I see translation also as interpretation and the use of body language and sign language. So in the late 1990s, my father worked with the Embassy of India and he was posted in Moscow. And my mother was there with him, and I was at that point of time a student at JNU. So, and I used to go to spend my summers over there. But then one day my mother calls me on the phone, and she, these were the days before mobile phones, of course. So we used to wait for that Sunday morning phone call from home. And she says, I was very disturbed because Anya's daughter is getting divorced. Now, Anya was our house help who used to come in 2 days, to come home 2 days a week from the embassy. Anya did not speak a word of English. My mother did not speak a word of Russian. So, but my mother somehow figured out that Anya's daughter's marriage was in trouble and Anya's daughter was getting divorced. So she told my father, and my father goes back the next day when Anya comes to work. He asks his interpreter to find out, and lo behold, it was indeed the case. So how did my mother find out that Anya's daughter was getting divorced? So Anya apparently said one word, douche, which is Russian for daughter, and she took off her own wedding ring. And so she said, do it. And that was how she signified that her daughter was her daughter's marriage was giving up. So again, I found that, it's a story that has stayed with me in almost 30 years since then, because I found it very fascinating how two women who did not understand a word of each other's language, but they were able to communicate each other through translations of sign language, body language, and how my mother was able to get all the housework done by her at that point of time. And Anya was, of course, very good at her job. My third and final story is, of course, when I first did my first official translation, which was as part of a course on translation in my MA, run by Professor Harish Narang at JNU, in which what he asked us to do was he gave us a short story in English, and he asked us to translate that into our own mother tongues. And so everybody in the class was translating it into their own language. So, and we all wondered, how are we going to, how is this ever going to be evaluated? Because Sir obviously will not know everybody's language. So how is it going to be evaluated? And the next time we went into the classroom, he takes back the English translation and now tells us to retranslate what we translated into Bangla back into English. So we had a translation and a retranslation, and the difference between the original and this version is what was going to evaluate was. And again, this is something that stayed with us because it was of course a pedagogical tool, but it was also at the same time an exercise in seeing how, when we retranslate something back into the source language, how we change the registers and how we change the language of that. So that is enough about me and my experiences with translation. I am, of course, now in the process of doing my first official translation in which is not from Bangla, but which is from Hindi. So as somebody who has actually just studied Hindi for, officially studied Hindi for 3 years, but with living in Delhi now for nearly 30 years, it's a challenge of a different kind, but I'm seeing where I go with that. So we have 5 speakers in this session: Shomdatta Mondal and Nivedita Sen, and Nivedita Di as we call her, Arunava Sinha, and Kiriti Sengupta and Rajoshi Potranobish, out of which Kiriti and Rajoshi have said that they would like to do a joint presentation. So we are going to go in the order of Shomdatta Di going first, followed by Nivedita Di, then Kiriti and Rajoshi, followed by Arunabha to wind up this session. So I would start by introducing very briefly Shomdatta Di, who is, of course, very well known to all of us. She is a critic, reviewer, and translator, and a former professor of English at Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, a recipient of several prestigious international fellowships and awards, widely published at home and abroad. Her areas of interest include American literature, contemporary fiction, film and culture studies, diaspora studies, and translation. She has a long list of translated volumes. I'll just mention the few most recent ones: The Travels of a Sadhu in the Himalayas, which is by Jaladhar Sen; The Murderer by Manik Bandyopadhyay; Monottama, Narrative of a Sorrowful Wife; and The Last Days of Rabindranath Tagore in Memoirs, and the correspondences of Nirmal Kumari Mohalanobish and Rabindranath Tagore. These are just the ones in the last 5 years, and they go back, I mean, from her up to at least up to 210. So without further ado, I hand over to Shomdatta Di. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really my pleasure to come to an academic or semi-academic gathering after a long time, because after retirement, I stopped going to conferences, making presentations. I now utilize my time in translating and doing things what I like to do, things which I couldn't do for the last 35 years. No compulsion, nothing. What I like to do, what I like to translate, what I like to write. So now it gives me a great pleasure. I have been, as I've been corresponding with uh, Chandra and the book review, Adnan and others, and it was only here, day before yesterday at dinner, that the names and the faces matched. We had never met. All these, we've been doing book reviews, sending reviews, corresponding, but we had never met. And just now, the person sitting next to me, I was telling him, Arunabha Sinha, that we know you each other by names. Today is the first day I'm physically, personally meeting you. That's not the case. Now, over these last 2 days, I've been hearing, and also in translation seminars and workshops, same old problems of have been repeated in different ways of correct word selection, this, that, whether nuances are there. I am not going to go at all into all this. Personally, I will tell you my own story of how I became a translator and what are some of the problems and challenges I faced as a translator. So I think from this, it will clear a lot of things also. Now, the very first thing, let me tell you, I did not do any translation at all till I landed up at Shantiniketan at Vishwabharati. And what happened was, Tagore was thrust upon us as the DRS departmental project, and we had to produce 2 books every year from the publication grant of the DRS scheme, and we didn't know what to do. So that was a kind of forced, each of you start translating and we'll bring out volumes. So that was my first venture into translation. And this polyglot, this man called Rabindranath Tagore, there is no end. Me, so ashamed, being a Bengali, knew nothing except, like all other average Bengalis, read some of his stories and his songs, of course, etc., with which we are being groomed. But Tagore, in the serious sense, and being a translator of that, was my first step at trying to venture even at the tip of the iceberg till today that we could not reach in full. So that is how I started my translations, short pieces, pieces that were prescribed by the departmental colleagues that we have to put such a. And as you know, in average, people only relate issues of education, philosophical themes, etc. There are other different perspectives of this writer which are not focused at all, even in translation. And in one such case, I was given to translate some funny skits that Tagore wrote, which is just fun, but it was the most difficult part to translate those skits from Bengali because each word had different meanings and you didn't know how to express. He himself is playing with the word. Let me just give you, I hope you all will understand little Bengali. Hate kanta phute geche, golaper kanta phute geche. The thorn of the, the thorn of the rose bud has pricked. Now, how do you translate it that? Was it kanta? The little boy is asking, what kind of kanta? And then he explains. Now, how do you make three different versions which Tagore is playing with the word kanta when all of them are translated into thorn in English? To get this, that's what I'm saying. So I'm not going into all that. Now what happens is over time, it was very difficult. Some of his prose pieces, philosophical pieces were very difficult. And all this translation exaggerated when it came just before, as I was telling with my friends last night over dinner, that in the 150th year of Tagore's birth centenary, 2011, that we got a big thrust worldwide. We were all invited. By default of being Vishwabharati, everyone thought we were Tagore experts. And we had to go around the world. Colleagues are giving lectures at various forums throughout the world on Rabindranath on 150 years. Harvard brought out the Essential Tagore, in which so I have contributed 4 or 5 different sections. And gradually that is how I got into translation. And as usual, therefore, my earlier writings, a lot was based on materials available at Vishwabharati at our archives. And I did a serious book project on my own, was a text called, which Vishwabharati Publications brought out, Wanderlust, Travels of the Tagore Family, little essays. It is not Tagore himself and his son. It is about 9 women and 5 men, each narrating their own experiences of travel anywhere. One of his elder sisters went only up to Bandel Church and that experience of going up to Bandel Church becomes a kind of a getting out of the house. And Tagore himself, when he was young, how he traveled with his father to Bakrota and to Dalhousie and those Shimla and all those hill stations. He was a 10, 11-year-old boy. His father took him along with him, describing of that travel, and all others, members of the family. And that is how that book came out. And in a way, that also got me into a new genre of writing, which at that point of time wasn't considered canonical enough as it is considered today, and that is travel narratives. From that point onwards, I got deeply involved into travel narratives seriously, and not only with Tagore's travels, his family's travels. From then on, I have been translating Tagore's 19th century women and men travelers. A lot, it's a big treasure, from Bangla into English. Over the years, I've been doing that. Several of these books have received great feedback. The first Bengali ever novel, written by a travelogue written by a woman as early as 1885. It was a lady called Krishna Bhamini Das who went to England with her husband and wrote a whole full book, serious narrative called England Bongo Mohila. So that was my first venture. I did it. Cambridge Scholars Publishing at that time published it from England, but no sale distribution in this country. Hardly people knew about it. And I don't know how to publicize your anyhow. So from that point onwards, I have translated at least 6 or 7 other travel writers. And among them, these writers, some of them are well known, some of them are not. But this entire niche of Bengalis traveling abroad, Bengalis going out of their house, women traveling abroad, it can be considered also. And now, over all these years, I feel proud that plenty of PhD dissertations and theses are being now throughout India being on travel writing. And I find most of my translated books being, part of the regular. I brought out 3 volumes of Indian travel writing per se, and I saw it was just a little bit. Now, coming to the translation, now I have just 2 things to say. My only consideration is readability, even with the 19th century writers, some with very difficult English, some with very difficult convoluted sentences in Bangla. You have to be the only focus aim is readability of the text in the English, that it doesn't reproduce the convoluted line by line style of the 19th century. In Bengali especially, I don't know about others, we have this 2 Cholit Bhasha and the Sadhu Bhasha. I don't know how you define it. Cholit Bhasha is basically the colloquial language in which you speak, and Sadhu Bhasha is the Shuddha language in which you write. So to translate from Shuddha Bhasha to Cholit Bhasha and to make it readable in English, that it doesn't read like a convoluted text, 19th century heavy stuff. This is the only challenge I faced. Now, another thing I just want to say, that in doing this translation, I find that if we study how Bangla writers with Bengali origin have been writing in English, novelists, Amit Chaudhuri, even Amitabh Ghosh and others, how over time glossary is gone away with, no glossaries, the text is impended, sometimes not even italicized anymore. Sometimes it takes the readers too much of granted when deliberately Bangla words are not even italicized or explained in parentheses. That is one extreme. I will just give you one example which I fumbled with. Amit Chaudhuri had written a novel and he writes, I went to the dining table and I saw the Pabda staring at me. Well, first time, I'm talking this about 10-15 years back. Now, not even Pabda fish. The Pabda staring at me, not Pabda in italics. So it's all right to be, you have to understand the culture of the Bengali culture to understand his text. But how difficult it is for all the readers, you can understand. Similarly, in that same novel, I remember, I opened my shirt and hung it in the alna, ULNA. It's the clothes horse where you, so, you don't go that far, but I think going in the middle way, doing away with glossary, and also explaining sometimes in parentheses some words. Of course, common words need no introduction. This last text, which just came out 2 months ago, Jalodhar Sen's travel, 1890, he went to the Himalayas, and he wrote his, a narrative of traveling to the Himalayas. In that text, when I translated, sadhus need no introduction, but chotis also we know even now, travelers going for the hills. You don't have to define a choti or a kamandulu or the jhola or the stick and all that. But in some places, he even makes a discrimination of narrating 3. I was puzzled. He is going to visit Bodrinath. In one place he calls it Bodrinath. The second place he calls it in the writing Bodri Narayan. And the third place he calls it Narayan. It all retains to the same text. So why is he using 3 things for the same place and same text? This puzzled me. Then later I realized Bodrinath is the place Bodrinaran is the temple, and Bodrinath also, Nath is the god himself. So he, within that same language, he makes these three discriminations. So I'm just going away from all this. I just want to give you two examples. I've been very happy working with dead writers. I tell you why. They don't come over your neck. I'll give you just two examples of what difficulty I had with working with two living writers. Of course, now, over the past few years, they are dead. Huh.
No cause and effect, I hope.
No. So I tell you, I'll give you the story and that will explain everything. Professor Sukumari Bhattacharya, the famous Sanskrit scholar, she had a book called, in Bangla, The Comparative Popularity of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, a comparative analysis. And that book, it was written in Bangla, she wanted it to be translated. So this was my first commissioned translation. My friend was her PhD student. She dragged me along one day to her house and said, Sukumaridi is looking for someone from English background who can do justice and translate her novel. So when I went to meet this lady, the first thing she said was, look here, my daughter, her daughter is the famous is Tanika Sarkar. You must be knowing in Delhi. She is Tanika Sarkar's mother, by the way. So my daughter began this translation. She's done 2 chapters out of the 14 chapters. Now I want you not to discard those 2 chapters, to read it and go along with her style of translating and finish the book. Okay. So it was very nice. It was a challenge for me. I took it as seriously as ever. And when I went with, and she says, you bring me back 2 sample chapters. I went, very good. She's a professor of English also. So she knew even the English. She said, won't this word be better? That word, very meticulous. And the book of course, got published. I felt very bad. So I asked Tanika, should I put in your name? She says, go ahead. And so the book is now published in English with joint translators, Tanika Sarkar and Somdatta Mandal. But this is the story of my first commission project. Now Sukumaridi is no longer there, but it doesn't happen. She was very cooperative. The last story with which I'll end my presentation is another very famous sorry, Bengali novelist. All of you know about her, Navanita Devsen. Navanita Devsen, I was also, since I was so much into travel writing, translating women, one publisher approached me for a manuscript. So I said, I sincerely want to translate Navanita Devi's story of her sudden visit to the Kumbh Mela. She had gone for a conference in Hyderabad and suddenly she decides she'll go to the Kumbh Mela. And how she takes a flight and lands up in Kumbh Mela with all her files and with her, seminar dresses, etc. And in a tongue-in-cheek, very nice a narrative. It is travel as well as, a very... So he went and got the permission and I went and met her and she says, very well, go ahead. I was so scared that I tried to be as close to the text as possible, didn't want to, make much changes. Anyhow, the manuscript was given to her. She went, sat over it for several months, and then she says, I'm not very happy with what is happening. I need a few more consultations. She gave that same manuscript to 2 different editors. Each editor brought out and corrected the volumes. Still, one day we had a sitting with her daughter. Her daughter is Antara. So she was here in Delhi. She came to Calcutta. We had sittings at her house. This word, that word, it went on. And then there was no end to it. Then she had an eye operation. And then she said, I can't see anything for 6 months now. And then she said, if I have to check the final manuscript, ask the publisher, not me, you enlarge the number 18 or 24 font size and the whole manuscript, bring it back so that I can now read it properly. Fine. It went on. After all these things happened, she suddenly one day told me, you know, I'm not happy with it. I don't find myself in the story. This was the sentence she told me. I just can't find myself in the story. So I think I won't go for it. And fine, a failed attempt, I didn't know. Years later, about 2 years later, I met this publisher and he said, ma'am, the book is out. I said, really? Who is the translator? She says, one such and such a person. She was one of the editors. So, fine. So, Somdatta Mondal was nowhere in the picture. Next year, very next month, Navanitadi came over for a conference in our department at Shantiniketan. And in the evening, in the guest house, I went just to say a courtesy visit, hello. And she said, yes, have you seen the new book? It has come out. You know, in the acknowledgement section, I have acknowledged your name, that you are one of the early translators of my book. I said, well, I didn't know about it. Thank you. I didn't even know that the book has come out. And I have acknowledged you. Don't think that I haven't acknowledged you. And that was the end of the full stops. That's why I'm saying I am very scared of working with living writers. Dead, white, or 19th century stuff. I prefer where there is no such intervention, where the editor, copy editor, of course, sometimes they do. And two other books, I am taking too long, and I know I'm finishing. Two books of translation. Here, my fellow Kiriti Sengupta. One day I translated a volume of an anonymous text by a Bengali woman called Monottama. It's a mid-19th century novel which hardly few people know about. It is same time written 2 years around Bankim Chandra's time. And the author doesn't, we don't know who she is because it says written by a Hindu lady. Just mentions it as a Hindu lady. And this, I translated it, this text was found initially from the London archives by one Bengali researcher, and somehow he passed away, and I chanced to happen to read that book, and I said this should be translated. Monottama, the narrative of a sorrowful wife. The narrative of a sorrowful wife written by a Hindu lady or Hindu Mohi. Kulin Hindu, you know, that was the title of the book. So it's a slim volume and it's very interesting because this wife suffers with a husband who is illiterate and she is educated. The story is reversed. She is educated. She wants her husband to understand that reading is necessary. It was some kind of a, I don't know what, who she is. And that is how, and thanks to Kiriti, he published it. I don't know how many copies are sold. Once a manuscript is out of the translator's bag, we don't know whether it sells or it's the publisher's headache. But this is another one. And the last one I did was Manik Bandyopadhyay, our Bengali novelist, his last unpublished novella, which also was asked by one of my professors to be translated, and Kiriti has been very nice to publish that as well. So you see, you must be thinking this woman is only talking about herself, but I think these problems of being a translator and talking about, it all depends on whom you are translating, with whom you are collaborating, and what is the neat result they expect from you. Who is the targeted readership? Thank you very much. I'm sorry I took away 2 minutes extra time.
Thank you, Somdatta, for that fascinating presentation. I know it was a little overtime, but it was so fascinating in itself that I didn't really have the heart to stop you there. I think a very critical line that I took away from this presentation was, I don't find myself in the story. And this is something I think we need to discuss is how much if the original author is still alive, how much should be the contribution of that original author especially if we are translating, from into English, from in Indian languages. I mean, in the actual translation, because there are, of course, we do talk about the translated text being a new text altogether. So, if the translation is a new text altogether, what is the role of the original author? And does the original author actually have a say in whether they find themselves in the story or not? Anyway, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Nivedita Sen, and Nivedita Di, as we know her, a long time colleague at Hansraj College, and on a personal note, somebody who has actually taught me and many others the way to evaluate answer scripts, in the Central Evaluation Center, in those early days when we were getting into it, like, to ensure that we did a proper job of it. So she has written over 30 reviews for the book review. She specializes in Bangla children's literature and has published a book, Literary Constructions of the Child in 20th Century Bengal, by Routledge in 2015. As a comparative proficient in Bangla and English, she has extensively translated fiction and non-fiction from Tagore, The Home and the World, to her own compilation of short stories for children, published by Sahitya Academy 2011. She has translated Syed Mustafa Shiraj's detective novels for adolescents, as well as a collection of his adult stories from Katha. Her translations also include two of Shivaji Bandyopadhyay's seminal critical books on children's literature, Tulika 2015 and Routledge 2025. She was shortlisted for 2 awards for her translation of Anita Agnihotri's novel, Mahanadi, Niyogi Books 2021. Thank you, Nivedita Di. Over to you.
It's okay. It's closer. Okay, we are running against time, so without any more niceties or ceremony, I will start by saying that I'm going to do exactly what Shomdata said she wouldn't do, to talk about nuances, this, that, and the other. So I'll start. I'll I take this on with a hands-on approach, empirically highlighting the deadlocks that sometimes make it difficult for a word, phrase, or sentence in the source language to be transmitted through the target language. For me, that is Bangla and English, of course. So, uh, figurative use of language comprises a major hindrance in translation. Proverbs and idioms, metaphors and similes, even, mm, even kind of uh, contextual citing of or parodying of excerpts from canonical texts. Now, how to rewrite all this in a reader-friendly idiom so that it could be absorbed well in the culture of the receiving literature. Um, I'll straight away jump to, one phrase from my translation of Rabindranath Tagore's Home in the World, 2004. Bimala's red ribbon, uh, peeping through her profuse black hair, is described as what would literally be the lustful tongue of the furious Kal Boishakhi storms. Now, perhaps imagining that I was writing for a more global readership, I decided that they would not understand Kal Boisakhi, and so I settled for something like this: the lascivious streak of lightning presaging a storm. Now, in the process, I think the metaphor has lost much of its pictorial and sensual quality. Um, Further, colloquial expressions, differences in dialect differences in dialect within the source text, and expletives, puns, quibbles, differences in dialect, sorry, not differences in dialect, these kind of things, alliterations, homonyms, rhymes, homophones, homonyms. Now, these are sometimes used in dialogues to showcase the wordsmith within certain characters, or they're present in the narration itself. Now, they also undergo major impairment in being translated from one language into another which has no shared ancestry. Now, there's another novel I translated, Said Mustafa Siraj's. It's not novel, sorry, it's a group of short stories. And I will only be talking about fiction because that is all I translate. So, Siraj's Colonel's Detective Stories, which is for adolescents, uh, 2004. Now, in this, for instance, the solution of each case depends on working out a word or numerical puzzle. Letters from the Roman uh, word square. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's called the Cirencester word square. It's very interesting. It's got a lot of wordplay in it. It is both an acrostic and a set of uh, palindromes. And all this is kind of refashioned into an anagram that is the key to the whereabouts of the hidden treasure. Uh, in another story, in a rhyme of 4 lines and 20 syllables, 10 of those syllables start with different letters, and they have corresponding syllables starting with the same 10 letters. Within that lies the clue to the whodunit. Now, translating this, keeping both the meaning and the wordplay intact, was no mean effort, but of course not totally satisfactory. Anyway, today I will mainly discuss not semantic snags, but the obstacles in conveying the nuances of a particular cultural milieu in a non Indian language. Uh, this will chiefly be from my translation of Anita Agnihotri's novel Mahanadi, published in 2021. This novel explores the trials and tribulations in the lives of marginalized communities, uh, and it is subsumed within the grand narrative of the eponymous river. Mahanadi there is not an inert geographical signpost, but what is called an unattached, beautiful enchantress is the protagonist all along. The translated text too must make the reader leave behind some of the characters that we get involved with and move on with the river. I even wondered if I should drop the article the before Mahanadi because it superimposes the grammatical requirement of an alien language. However enmeshed it is within our linguistic register. But then I conservatively chose not to violate the grammar of English. Uh, on the changing canvas of this beautiful yet brutal river, cyclones that have imprinted their paws and wreaked havoc, jeopardizing lives and livelihood, link the chapters as an adversary. An orphan child is named Jhanja, storm, because she was born during the great cyclone in Odisha. Although I assumed I was writing for an Indian readership here, I could hardly express and underline the trauma or the metaphorical cyclone that this child has undergone through English, in which names hardly personify any abstract ideas. Uh, the Chronicle of the Mahanadi charts rich and complex local histories of the rulers, their dynasties, and feudal fiefdoms in Odisha. By the way, I chose this novel with an Odisha setting because I thought that this session is of Odia and Bangla. Uh, History, mythology, and folklore are interwoven in the minds of people living at the fringes of what we call civilization. Their regimens of farming, for instance, are determined by discrete diurnal rhythms, seasonal calendars, and solar movements, while the lunar cycle governs their festivals, their feasts, their fasts. They demand a phraseology in the target language that should resonate with the original. For instance, the carnivalesque colors and flavors of the rustic Hindu festivals that are talked about, Maghi Purnima, Bali Jatra, Rath Jatra, Makar Sankranti, Charak Mela, and Vishwakarma Puja, were easy to convey in English while adequately bringing to life another festival of the syncretic god Buddha Raja, who's a Buddha surrogate, worshipped across, worshipped alike across religions and communities, penetrating the seamless interface of Adivasi traditions, tantric practices, uh, uh, Buddhist rituals, and Hindu superstitions. That was much more demanding. Translation has required attention not only to these, culture specific lores uh, unraveled through community festivals, but also the unique ways of some of the characters getting personally involved with them. But I will not go into that for want of time. Um, then the the rural, agricultural, riverine, and even forested locales are replete with diverse flora and fauna. Now, for instance, talking about the vegetable mankochu, it would be inappropriate to call it by the species of arum, and a condomule by the generic name radish, or kendu and ketuki by the phonetically and culturally incongruous mangosteen and screw pine, because those are the closest words that I could find. So I let them be as they are. I have, however, translated the sheem, or what we call same in Hindi, as broadbean because it is an English equivalent. There is something called a Chanta Nua, or a New Sheem festival in a village where vegetables are sparse. The English translation uh, will, the English translation, broad being, will, yeah, will facilitate, yeah, will facilitate associative clarity despite stripping the sheem of all its evocative connotations. Then, among numerous birds, animals, snakes, and fish in the text, the author herself uses familiar English names like kingfisher and pangolin amidst the untranslatable jolpipi, chichol, kutura, or chanajuri, creatures native to the subcontinental tropics of South Asia. Now, most readers of a Bangla novel in English are city bred, socially advantaged, English educated people like you or me, reproducing to them in English the constraints of communities who perpetually live in an economy of subsistence because their jobs are caste-based. The Kaibatas or Keots, who are both fisherfolk and boatmen, the weaver and dyer caste, the brazier caste, and the Kultas or fishermen, Kultas or farmers, it has required preserving all the subtleties of the vernacular. Similarly, the translator's challenge has also been to communicate, despite bottlenecks, the privation represented in the measly repertoire of food dismissed by well-to-do people as not fit for human beings in the lives of the poorest among the poor. Now, of course, I mean, I've tried to do all this, but no translation is a finished work, as we all know. And we've not brought up this question at all, despite AI's shoddy attempts to snatch our jobs from us. We must keep trying to disseminate these, what we today call echoes across tongues, that enrich our love of language and literature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nivedita Di. You know, one of the most unfortunate roles of being a chair is you need to keep tapping on people to stick to the time limit, even though you are too fascinated and you want them to continue to speak as what they are talking about. But the nuances of translation that you talked about, and particularly, you know, the very specifics of vocabulary, like where we are, you talked about, like, you know, reducing them to a generic term and how that really takes away from the feeling of that word. And from there, I actually, since we are talking about food, and I go over to Kiriti and Rajoshi, and I'm actually going to start by how I was very interested, because when in the previous session, Kiriti talked about Khirer Putul, and the nuances of the word kheer in Bengali and in Hindi. I mean, if we tell anybody, if I tell my husband, for example, that, you know, we are making a doll out of kheer, he'll be like, "What the hell are you talking about?" So, and I found that, you know, very interesting from your previous session. So, to introduce Rajoshi and Kiriti, they would be doing a joint presentation, because Rajoshi is currently translating something of which Kiriti is the publisher. So, they're going to bring.
Already
Oh,
translated.
he has already translated, and Kiriti is publishing, is editing and publishing that. So it's going to be give us both these dynamics of the translation process. Rajoshi Potsanubish is a multilingual poet, editor, translator, and reviewer dabbling into different forms of poetry. He has a knack of writing in fewer words with a lot for the readers to ponder about. So I'm hoping that's going to be the same thing here, speaking in fewer words and leaving us a lot to ponder about. Wiccan by philosophy, he has 11 collections of poetry, 10 in English and 1 in Bengali, and 5 collections of translations, 2 co-authored with Dr. Ranjit Datta of Assam. He has collections of sonnets, haibun, haiku, and free verses. He is credited for the first ever collection of Gogyoka, titled The Last Drop of Your Tears, published by Hawakal and launched at the World Book Fair, New Delhi 2023, which has been translated into Assamese and is currently being translated into Hindi. He's also credited with the first ever translation of Gogyoshi, titled Checklist Anomaly, by a single author in English, also published by Hawakal Publishers. Gossips of Our Surrogate Story is his last published poetry anthology of Wiccan prose poems. Kiriti Sengupta was awarded the 2018 Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize and the 2024 Nilim Kumar National Honor. He has had its poetry featured in various publications, including The Common, The Florida Review Online, Headway Quarterly, The Lake, Amethyst Review, Dry, Authorlets, Outlook, and Madras Courier. His selected poems have been released by Transcendent Zero Press from Houston, Texas in August 2025. He has authored 14 books of poetry and prose, published 2 volumes of translations, and edited 9 anthologies. He serves as the chief editor of Ethos Literary Journal and leads the English division at Hawakal Publishers Private Limited, one of the top independent presses of India. Over to you, Rajoshi and Kiriti.
Rajoshi, you begin.
Good afternoon. Uh, as far as speaking in fewer words are concerned, thank God for small mercies, I am not an academic. And as far as translation is concerned, it reminds me of a particular statement by Rabindranath Tagore, wherein he says, যখন কবিতায় শব্দ আসবে না, when you don't find words for your poem, যখন গানে সুর আসবে না, when you don't have tunes for your songs, তর্জমা করো, translate. So translation is, I mean, not jumping into the whole sea of putting one language to other, throwing one culture to other. It's a self exercise too. It often helps you. I mean, I tried it myself, that we who had been writing for some time, we do have this very egocentric word of saying that I am now suffering a writer's block. Translate. You'll be out of it. Because a few words from your vocabulary that are actually embedded at some remote corner of your brain that is not active at this moment would actually be activated when you start doing translation. And translation can be an exercise, whether you publish it or not, whether it is a good translation or not, really doesn't matter. And since we are speaking about Bangla to English, I'd had the pleasure of translating Assamese to English to Assamese to Bangla to, and I'd had the pleasure of translating Sileti Bangla to English. What is Sileti Bangla? Sileti is it is actually Bangla with Bangla script with a completely different diabolic angle. So the language is completely different. It has a different. The script is Bangla, and if we actually go back in history, Siletis, they say, Sylhet is a particular district in Bangladesh, and Siletis, they say they had their own script too, they had their own literature too, which is now obscure, which does not exist anymore. But I'd had the pleasure of translating Shutapa Chakraborty, who had been the recipient of the Sahitya Academy Yuva Puraskar, to English, and that was hell of an exercise. And but the one that Kiriti and I would actually like to specify in this particular session is Buddha and Void. Buddha and Void, this particular book was actually a book called Buddho Shunno, written by a living author. I'd had the misfortune of translating only the living authors. So, and this book, this particular translation had failed 6 times before I took it over. And this is not what I'm saying. This is what Kiriti and Bitan, the how I call head honchos, would say. And I would just read a few lines from the translator's note of this book. The process of making Buddha and Void, originally Buddho Shunno, is a story of varied twists, turns, hiccups, and pleasures. Someday we may even write about the process the publisher and the editor took us through to translate this rare type of poetry. I never believed in faithful translations. I have never believed in that. As far as I would restrict myself to poetry only. I never believed in faithful translations of poetry, but this particular collection deserved loyalty more than anything else. Thus, the passionate translator in me was put to sleep with incredible difficulty. And we almost moved around the country. This bloke called me over from Kolkata to Delhi. We moved from Delhi to Benares, and where all flights got cancelled due to fog. And then we drove down to Calcutta, and ultimately, with the grace of Buddha, this book happened. This book happened. Yes, Kiriti.
Yeah. So I still believe Buddha and Void, the collection of poems by Shaburi Roy, is essentially, and it was essentially, a teamwork. As a Bengali proverb runs, Doshe mili kori kaj, hari jiti nahi laj. We stand or fall together. Well, during the entire length of editing this book, I'm the sole editor of this book of translated poems. During the entire length of editing the work, I made the translator and the author sit together for hours. I had Rajorshi's primary draft of the translated poems. Shobori read each poem aloud multiple times before I suggested edits to Rajorshi. Of course, we had differences in opinion, but we focused on achieving a seamless blend of source poem's essence and the nuance of the target language. Over to Rajoshi.
Well, the target language, source language, as far as I done one translation of prose of Binayak Bandyopadhyay where you actually, and that was again a psychological thriller. I mean, that is one sickness that is sickening Bengali literature, current Bengali literature at this point of time. So, but when it comes to poetry, the common saying that actually goes is, in translation of poetry, what is lost is actually poetry, and this is where this particular exercise, Buddha and Void, had perhaps stood out. I mean, now when we read, I think these are all very much poetry.
Well, it is often said that in a poem, in an original poem, the portion which remains untranslated or untranslatable, that is the real essence of poetry in it. It is often said.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, a small part of this translated poetry, one poem that I would like to read, and these are all untitled poems. Man doesn't need to know the airport where Siddharth loses his luggage of desire. He does not have clothes to change. The lost box had all the sickness, suffering, and death. From dawn to evening, the sky is pristine. His tryst with peace, the twilight is smeared with saffron dust. The twilight is smeared with saffron dust.
The Bengali original was this: হারিয়ে গেছে সিদ্ধার্থর বাসনা তোরঙ্গ, হারিয়ে গেছে সিদ্ধার্থর বাসনা তোরঙ্গ, ঠিক কোন বিমানবন্দর থেকে মানুষের তা না জানলেও চলবে. Man does not need to know the airport where Siddhartha loses his luggage of desire. বাক্সবন্দি জরা ব্যাধি মৃত্যু পাল্টানোর মতো কোনো পোশাক বুদ্ধের কাছে নেই এখন. He does not have clothes to change. The lost box had all the sickness, suffering, and death. সকাল থেকে বিকেল পর্যন্ত আকাশের রং সাদা. From dawn to evening, the sky is pristine. শান্তির সঙ্গে তার দেখা হয়েছে, গোধূলিতে উঠছে গৈরিক ধুলো. His tryst with peace. The twilight is smeared with saffron dust.
And another one, if I may read. Yashodhara lives in me, little Rahul thrives in me. He left, he went away many a time. Void is concealed, cry of grace. The battleground is ready, and so are the war planes. In the night, curfew prevails. Buddha walks along in the deep of moonless night. He heads towards the full moon. Yashodhara lives in me, little Rahul thrives in me.
The original Bengali is this: আমার মধ্যে ঘুমিয়ে আছে যশোধরা, আমার মধ্যে ঘুমিয়ে আছে ছোট্ট রাহুল. Yashodhara lives in me, little Rahul thrives in me. তিনি চলে গিয়েছিলেন, চলে গেছেন বারবার। হি লেফট, হি ওয়েন্ট অ্যাওয়ে মেনি আ টাইম। সৌন্দর্যের হাহাকারের অন্য নাম শূন্যতা। ভয়েড ইজ কনসিলড ক্রাই অফ গ্রেস। যুদ্ধক্ষেত্র প্রস্তুত, প্রস্তুত তার যুদ্ধ বিমান। রাতে কারফিউ জারি, গভীর অমাবস্যায় হেঁটে যান তিনি, হেঁটে চলেন পূর্ণিমার দিকে। The battleground is ready, and so are the warplanes. In the night, curfew prevails. Buddha walks along in the deep of moonless night. আমার মধ্যে ঘুমিয়ে আছে যশোধরা, আমার মধ্যে ঘুমিয়ে আছে ছোট্ট রাহুল। Yashodhara lives in me, little Rahul thrives in me.
And to wrap it all, translation is a fabulous tool not only to express what is not being expressed, but it's like an exercise, it's like a yoga, but we need people to accept, we need people to understand, and we need publishers to publish. I would be forever grateful to Hawakol for this, for being the publisher that they are, that they have uh, egged people like me along to do more translations. I'm personally doing another set of translations now for them. So to egg people like me into translations. And well, the market is ultimately the king. No matter what you do, no matter how much of diamond and gold and silver you stack into these pages, it's the market that ultimately decides. The market has to wake up now. Thank you.
Well, before I conclude, let me tell you, in the previous session, we talked about looking at the original text to compare whether the translation is right or wrong, or semi-right or semi-wrong. To be very honest, when I publish a translated piece, a translated work, I never ever look at the original text, because had I been the editor of the work, I would have asked for the original text, because an editor needs to check whether the translation flows seamlessly. As a publisher, I have nothing to do with this comparison. So, as a reviewer, when I'm asked to review a book of translated poems or a translated fiction, I never ever ask the publisher or the concern who has requested me or commissioned me to review a work of translation. I never ever look at the original text, because I'm not evaluating the worth of translation as the reviewer. My only aim is to look at the flow of the translated text, whether it would appeal to the target readers. That's the only concern of translation, and that should be. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that very, very interesting thing. I found it very interesting because, you kept repeating Amar Moddhe Ghumiye Ache, and the word Ghumiye Ache was once translated in one line, translated as lives in me, and in the next line, translated as thrives in me. So, this difference in the meaning that is ascribed to the same word in two successive lines, and I think these lines are repeated probably in the poem because you kept repeating these lines, is something I found very interesting. I also found the use of the word pristine very interesting for the word shada, which we would otherwise normally just use as white. But to just say that the sky is pristine instead of saying the sky is white or the sky is...
That's the beauty of poetry, no?
Yes. So and whether, I don't know whether this kind of, with this leverage that we have in poetry, whether we would have the same if we were translating prose or fiction, is something that we need to perhaps think about. Okay, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating session. I've learned so much. Our last speaker for this session is Arunabh Sinha, and he gave me a one-line bio note, which is that he has recently had his 101st translation published. those of us who follow him on Facebook, I think, know how frequently he says, my next work is out, and so on and so forth. He teaches at Ashoka University, where he is also the co-director of the Ashoka Center for Translation. I've just been asking him to tell me what his next works are. So this last published work is a memoir of Madhavi Mukherjee, and he is next coming out with the translation of Arundhati Roy's Mother Mary Comes to Me, and the memoir of Naughty Binodini. So without further ado, I hand over to Ornava Sinha.
Thanks very much. Just 2 days ago, the winners of the A.K. Ramanujam Prize for Translation were announced. The winners this year, this is a prize given every alternate year. The winners this year are Shipra Mukherjee and Mrinmoy Pramanik, who have translated Kalyani Thakur Charal's poetry into English. Kalyani Thakur Charal is she identifies as Dalit. In fact, she has an essay where she explains why she uses the word Charal or Chondal along with her name. The same book, this book in fact has not been published in India. It's been published by Tilted Axis Press in the UK. Tilted Axis Press has published Kalyani Thakur Charal as only their second writer from Bangla, the first being Shongita Bandopadhyay many years ago. Over the past 10 years or so, the one name that has come up most prominently in literary awards, whether for translated books or for all books, when it comes to Bangla, is that of Monoranjan Bapari. Monoranjan Bapari is also a Dalit writer. 4 of his books have come up for either shortlists or have actually won an award. His first book to be translated into English, which was his memoir, Itibritte Chandal Jibon, was also translated by Shipra Mukherjee and won the Hindu Best Book Award for Nonfiction. What I'm getting at is that the great thing about translation from Bangla, where Bangla, of course, is the hegemony is back. There's far too much presence of the Bengali language in Indian publishing. But what is important is that this presence over the past few years has increasingly moved towards writers who write on the margins. And they often write on the margins of Bangla Sahitya as well. So the most interesting thing is that in being translated into English and now into other Indian languages very importantly, they are getting a readership that is often denied to them in their own language. And the reason for that is that Bangla literature over the years, over the centuries, has had its equivalent of the dead white man, which is that it has been dominated by upper caste males, the Kulin Brahmon that you mentioned in your book. It has been dominated by upper caste males, and irrespective of the literary quality of their works, which is of a very high standard, the fact remains that it was their voice that was heard and read. And much of the marginal, what we call marginal writing, only because it has not reached the mainstream of publishing, but is actually very centrally rooted in the lives of Bengali-speaking people, has remained on the fringes of publishing through this generic form of publications called little magazines and some small publications. There is a publishing company named Chotuto Dunia, Fourth World, which publishes Dalit writing in Bangla, for example. Now, what I'm getting at through all of this is that for translating from Bangla, it is great that there is now a movement towards bringing out voices that were not normally heard before. We have heard examples of women writers who have always been, whose voices have been drowned under the male cacophony, as it were, but who have been writing in parallel with men all the time, right from the middle or towards the end of the 19th century, but who have never been heard of, certainly not in translation, until translators like Shonda Tadi and Nivedita Di brought out their works, made sure that their works came out in English. Now the question is, what is often asked is, who should translate, and can someone who has not lived that experience of the writer actually translate those books legitimately? This is now a worldwide question. Questions are often raised about whether black literature can be translated by anyone who has not had that authentic black experience. This actually brings me to what I feel is a very central question of translation, which is that I think there is a notion that translation is supposed to be precise, that it is supposed to communicate, I would like to sit here and contest this idea of communication. Communication implies a certain XYZ, which becomes XYZ no matter what language it is put in. Now, there is a lot of things that we do need to communicate with that kind of precision, right? Technical documents, legal documents, conversations between diplomats and heads of states when they don't have each other's language. There is a wonderful little episode, I'm not going to elaborate on it, but do read Javier Marias's A Heart So White. There's a wonderful, beautiful little story about interpreting between top ministers. But I would like to say that great literature is not precise. It is not meant to give us one definitive version of anything. It points us in a particular direction. And translation, whether it is from Bangla or whether it is from any other language, but I can only speak for Bangla, is supposed to put the reader on that path where they have to make that journey towards where that text might go. The text itself does not take you there. You have to participate in it and bring your own world into it. There is this notion of lost in translation. I would argue that any text you read may be lost because your reader will not have the same context as the one in which it was written. Who is to say that someone who is in the year 2026 reading a Bengali language text written 100 years ago will read it exactly the same way? They cannot. The language itself has changed so much. There is this wonderful story by who else but Borges about Pierre Menard, the man who wrote Don Quixote, in which Pierre Menard writes Don Quixote using exactly the same words as Cervantes. The same words, the same punctuation, same everything. And yet Borges proves that it's a completely different text. Because 400 years later, those words convey a completely different journey for the reader. And of course, it had to be Borges again who mischievously said, the original is not faithful to the translation. And that is absolutely so, because the original has its own, the so-called original has its own space. But every version of it that is created creates something else, which has a relationship, which eventually, like railway lines, which from a distance appear to meet, but never actually meet, but run in parallel. They take you alongside and hope to take you to that same point. And when someone translates a Manoranjan Bapari or a Kollani Thakur Charal, and their experiences which are denied the Bengali middle class and upper middle class as well. They do not have any idea of these experiences, frankly. It's just that the words seem to belong to the same language. The idea is to try and point towards a kind of experience that you can only live through these words. It is for you to create it for yourself. It is for you to enter a world that you do not belong to. It is for you to go into that world, not for that world to come to you. The idea is not to make it familiar and comfortable for the reader. The idea is to take the reader closer and ever closer and fail eventually, because you're never going to succeed. But in that journey of failure lies all the gain that you get. We were talking about the fact that I do not find myself in this text. I'm sorry, anything Bangla always comes back to Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, I don't know whether he did it in a moment of writer's block, but he translated T.S. Eliot, among others, and he translated The Journey of the Magi. And the poem Journey of the Magi, if any of you remember, the last line is, I should be glad of another death. It starts with a cold coming we had of it. And the Bangla of the a cold coming we had of it was Konkone Thandai Jatra Shuru Holo Mode. And at the end, Eliot writes, I should be glad of another death. And what Rabindranath does, and I wonder if Eliot would say he found himself in it, Rabindranath's last line is, Arekbar morte parle ami bachi. Right? And I'm sorry, I apologize to those who do not have Bangla, but roughly, very, very crudely, literally, that meaning would be, I would live if I could die once more. Because the Bengali language allows you that expression, bachi. So the question is, what is Rabindranath doing? He's creating something fantastic in the Bengali language. It doesn't have to be an equivalent or a precise version of what is in English. But he is being true to the idea of beauty, and he's saying, if I am using this language, I will do all that I can in this language to produce beauty. Which is also why I know for purposes of quick identification, we use words like source language and target language. But I'm personally very uncomfortable with this idea, because target language, you have this idea of an arrow hitting a bullseye or missing it. You get a 10 or a 9 or an 8 or a 7. For me, these are just languages that live in parallel. And you're forever making the journey. In fact, the very word translate is about taking a cross. It is not about creating a version of it, or an accurate version of it. So what I'm getting at is that if and I know we are almost there. No, 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 no. I'm going to stick to my time. I'm going to stick to my time. Yeah. So what I'm getting at through all of this is that the idea of translation is to create something as wonderful as that first version was, but to do it with all that the new language affords you. Use what the new language offers you. Make something beautiful in the new language and make something that did not exist in that language. Add to that literature so that a reader who reads it says, I have never read anything like this in this language before. That is the whole point. It is not about whether the word naka or the word dhong can be translated into something specific from Bangla into English or not. I want to end by telling you about a man named Ramanlal Soni. Do any of you know of him, Ramanlal Soni? Ramanlal Soni was an associate of Mahatma Gandhi. He went to jail with Mahatma Gandhi, he went to Yerawada jail. And there, because when you're in jail you have time, either you write the discovery of India or you learn a language. Ramanlal Soni learned Bangla. Why? Maybe there were other people with him who spoke Bangla. So he learned Bangla with their help, and he translated 186 books from Bangla to Gujarati. He translated till the last day, literally till the last day of his life, when he finally died at the age of 92. I'm saying that this is a passion that needs to be honored and respected and realized. It is the creation of an art form that truly makes something that would otherwise have remained on an island. It makes this beautiful object of art travel everywhere. And translation is of necessity the art form of failure, because it is not meant to succeed. If it succeeded, then it would give you only one specific version of what there is. But great art does not live by having only one life. As Walter Benjamin said, it is the afterlife, and the afterlife keeps coming over and over again. And in a strange way, the so-called original cannot have an afterlife in words, because it's frozen in those words. But translations keep giving this work afterlives over and over again in different histories, in different geographies, in different contexts. It's the greatest thing that anyone can do to a literature. And really, whether people buy these books or read these books is not the point at all. The point is that these works of art have been created and they live on. Thank you.
Thank you. We've come to the end of the speakers, and we will have about 15 minutes for discussion before our lunch awaits us. So just to sum up this session, I think we have traversed a huge range of time. I think most people start with Rabindranath Tagore, and I think my sari today also becomes quite coincidentally in that matter, because it does have the writings of Rabindranath Tagore all over it. And the central questions that we have raised here is like, what is the readability? I mean, if you're translating from Sadhu Bhasha into a more contemporary tongue today, how do you keep faithful to the original, if at all? Is it necessary? This is what Shomdattadi was talking about, the need excuse me, for a glossary, because I think since yesterday, a lot of the discussions that we have had have talked about how a glossary is now no longer being used in translations. But then if there is no glossary, how we are leaving it to the reader to understand what the pabda is, probably from the subsequent sentences, because the sentence or the pabda or the alna specifically is a very, very Bengali thing. To understand what it is, but then need to be, if you're not using the glossary, you would then need to describe it in further in the subsequent sentences in order to make the meaning clear to the readers who are there. So Nivedita Di then talked about the nuances of translation. She flipped it. She went and talked about the specifics of vocabulary, the use of AI and machine translation nowadays. And I think we are all encountering machine translation because the moment if you open any social media app where the original text is in another language and you click on show translation, the translation that you get is something which is absolutely preposterous in most of the cases, and it does not, I don't think it conveys the meaning whatsoever. And then Rajoshi and Kiriti talks about what is a good translation. I think the question they asked is, what do we mean by a good translation? And again, this is a question I think I would like to throw open to the audience over here. Is there anything as a good translation? Who decides what is a good translation vis-a-vis what is a not so good or a bad translation? Because the parameters are not fixed, and there cannot be any fixed parameters, because as we talk about, and again from Rabindranath Tagore to Manoranjan Bapari, we have traversed, we've traversed through time, we've traversed through class, we've traversed through caste, and the very important point of how writers who are writing from the margins in their original language are now, being read by more people and as part of the popular discourse in translation. So, what is translation supposed to communicate, if anything? I was very interested about what Orunaba said about, when Don Quixote was written 400 years later and how it had a different meaning. Leave alone 400 years. Nowadays, we see if you have, when you talk to the next gen, words which have a certain meaning for us have a totally opposite meaning for them. Cool for them is not cool. No, it's not, apparently. So, so cool is something which is of a different, it's a different things at different times of, it's hot, it's not cool, it's, it says don't try to be cool is something my daughter is always throwing at me. So, I don't know what I'm supposed to be, whether that means I'm supposed to be shouting at her all the time or I don't know. So, and a word like Naka, I think you mentioned, and just to end on this note, that many years back, a few years back, when the brand Nika was coming into prominence, for a lot of Bengali women, they actually said, Naika, wo kya hota? Naka hai. And Naka is not something you want to be called in Bengali. It has. So on that note, I leave the floor open for questions, comments, observations for the next 10, 12 minutes before food calls us, for lunch. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank Arunava for calling out the central problem that all the problems of translation, it seems to be based on not the problems of translation, but problematic understanding of what translation is. If we are going to continue looking at the question of equivalence, then samadhi has no equivalent in the same language as well. So calling it out that tomb is not an equivalent of samadhi is not, we are taking translation as equivalence here, when there are no equivalents even in the same languages. So I think we have to, as you pointed out, look beyond the question of equivalence, as you gave the example of Borges and Pierre Bernard. Then that leaves with the question of readability, which often crops up. So how do you look at the question of readability, especially when it is tied up to question of norms? So what is a good translation? Though we have not been able to spell it out, we do work with certain normativity here. So what are the norms that you follow as a translator that makes your text readable? Which norms of English do you keep in view? This is for Aruna. Yeah. Yeah.
What I try to look at is what relationship does the text have to the language in which it is written. And I try to create something like similar relationship between the translated text and the language into which it has been translated. So if the text that I am translating sits squarely in the most conventional version of the language, then I try to do the same in English. But if it stands at a distance, if it stands at a tangent, if it talks back to it, if it challenges it, then I try to do the same things with the translation. So that to me is readability.
I'm sorry for the kind of follow-up question. Then does that change English? Means every time we translate into English, we are transforming English into more Indianized, more Bengalijed version all the time. So can that be considered as a norm? Because then we are translating all the time into Indian English. We are never translating into English. So if you look at translation as a process of Indianization itself, then what language do you use? Is it far more Bengalized English, or would you use a kind of more colorless version of it? It does.
That's what I was going to ask.
No, I think it invariably happens that the translated idiom will never remain the same one, right? So, yeah.
No, Bengali is English.
So when the example
that
came up, example of fish that
like
came
we
up,
refer
for
to
example.
the bus stop as stoppage.
Yeah, for an example.
In Kolkata, we will never say bus stop. We'll say stoppage. Right. So
yeah.
that's when we have taken the marketing for buying. So that's when we've taken the English word and made it a Bengali word.
Yeah, there would be Maharashtrian English. There would be Chennai English, perhaps.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of it, right? That's the beauty of it. I don't think we are trying to attempt an English or an American English for that matter. We are just English, whatever that English might be. And of course, we are the biggest, we are the largest population of English speakers in the world, right? So it might as well be our language for all the difference it makes.
Also, in the history, words keep joining the language. Like veranda has become veranda, for instance. So it's not as if language is also, every word in every language is not just denotative.
No,
It becomes connotative. So
No, but it's also not just words. I mean, I remember reading a beautiful passage translated from Hindi where it said her sleep broke. And that is not something anyone who's beginning a text in English will ever write. But it was so beautiful because you know exactly, you hear another language behind it, but you also get an image that perhaps the English language could benefit from, could gain from. Everyone who speaks English and sleeps would say, my sleep broke, and how wonderful is that, right? So it's about, you use one language to make another language richer. That's the whole point always. Not as an objective. It happens.
I agree 100%. I don't think that admin have to worry about that at all. I'm wondering, really, 50 years from now, what languages will we all speak? What will we be speaking? I feel that it's going to be very different. We have no idea what languages are going to blend into what. And it's the way it's been all along. And this process will get faster now, that's all. That's all. And I think language, the purism of pure languages just don't exist. And they'd be very boring if they did exist, I think.
They already don't exist. My colleague Rita Kothari, Professor Rita Kothari has written this book where she makes this fabulous observation. She says if you travel from the extreme eastern end of India to the extreme western end, you will never be able to tell at which point one language becomes another.
Absolutely.
Yes, it just slowly, it morphs into a different tongue, and then suddenly after 100 kilometers you find it's a brand new set of words, and so on. So
it's sort of interesting that yesterday or day before yesterday we saw the news item about Tamil in an
Egyptian
inscription in Egypt, and the words there are Shighai Kotran. Shighai is a Sanskrit word, and Kotran is a Tamil word. Now, look at this mixture that took place 500 years or something like that before Christ. And Still there are purists in Tamil, purists in Sanskrit who keep saying, oh, we have this language and that language, we're not the same and all that. These mixtures have been going on forever because
Yeah,
we wanted
purity.
to understand each other. We wanted to understand
Yeah,
each
language and purity basically, I think, are contradictory terms.
That's
I mean, whether you talk in terms of space or you talk in terms of time. I mean, read Chaucer and read what you're. Chaucer would never recognize this as English at all.
Purity itself is a constructed term.
Yeah, purity of anything, language, why
Of
language
anything.
alone?
It's a value imposed on real life.
Anybody else? Any other? Yes, sir.
I have one question and an observation. The question is actually both of them are observations about Tagore translating the poem by Iliad. And the specific example that was given by Arunava, I think it's unique to someone like Tagore, a very great poet who understood Iliad in a particular way, and he constructed it, the last line the way he wanted to. Very beautiful, as you rightly pointed out. But can a non-poet like me or my colleagues here, many other colleagues here, take such liberties? Number one, we are not that creatively inclined. Unless we assume that translators are also, or translation is itself a creative exercise, and we can creatively respond to the so-called original. So that is one question. The second question about language, changing over 400 years. I recall the particular instance of Fakir Mohan Senapati's masterpiece, Chauman Athun, that's 6 acres and a half, which was published in 1901. And the second edition was brought out by his son, Mohini Mohan Senapati, 25 years later. And the same novel, he had to provide about 300 plus words in the glossary. Because within 25 years, because of standardization of different languages following the Urdu-Hindi controversy, many other Indian languages also went into, shedding the influence of foreign language. So Odia becomes more and more Sanskritized, and by 1925, many of the words that Fakir Mohan Senapati had used, drawing on Marathi, Persian, Urdu, etc., were lost to the Odia-speaking readers, of the next generation, you can say. So it's not even 400 years, So these are the two observations I had.
Would you like to? No, about taking liberties or not being a poet yourself.
I'm just reminded in a translation workshop in our university one day, I gave the Odia students the English version, the Bengali version of Jibanananda Das's famous poem Bonolata Sen. And I had with me for that workshop 16 English translations of Bonolata Sen, not one equal to the other. Great people have tried to attempt to translate this poem. I had 16, and the workshop was, this was in the Odia department, and I told them, well, this is the Bangla, you all understand the Bangla, and there was Shobita, my colleague in the Odia department. She also explained a little to the not so well-known Bengali, the Odia students, and said, you all do this collective exercise, all of you, one line each, go on translating this into Odia. The whole class. And then at the end of the day, they read it out. And you won't believe the fight and the quarrels with one word. Oh, why did he write that? Ma'am, this is a better subscription. This is a better translation. And it went on. And that is what I'm saying. There is nothing as a good, it's perceptive. These students could not come to a conclusion. So we said, well, if you work so hard, what we can do is we can make a standard sample Odia version of Bonolata Sen. And then I gave them the handout of the 16, where a simple word as chill, it has been translated as kite, a hawk, something else in each different version. So I don't think the good and bad, otherwise what Kiriti said already, his own publication, he has published 2 versions of Kirer Potul. And with age, I can also write a third translation of Kirer Putul and offer it to him for publishing it once again. So there is no end of readability, as I said at the beginning of my, is what I think at the end of the day counts, as it reads properly in the English language and not, what this, that goes on. This is what I have to say. So there is no perfect translator. Even the self-translators have failed many times in doing that. Self-translators have also failed.
If there are no more observations, I think our stomachs are growling and we can all move towards lunch. Thank you so much. Yeah, just one observation, I think she.
Yeah. So, although Professor Mandal has spoken about it, but I just want to know how important is positionality in translation. And my question is to Aruna, because even the reference you gave, the Ramanujan Award to the translated works of Kalyani Sharal, is given to a Kulin Brahmin, is the translation work of Charal by a Kulin Brahmin woman. So I just want to understand how their experiences can be produced and reproduced and how that reflexivity can be reproduced. So, yes.
Yeah, thanks. From your example, I figured out what positionality means. I think it's who you are vis-a-vis the writer and the text, and therefore, right? And therefore, whether you can authentically reproduce everything. The point is that writing.
Because the politics has been always about can subaltern speak, but the question was they always spoke, but could you understand?
Correct. Absolutely right. So, in some small way, translation tries to make more people get closer to what the subaltern is saying. As for who that person is, it's a separate political question, right? Of who can speak for whom. But if you look at it purely as a literary endeavor, then you are being led by the text and by your reading of the text. And your reading of any text does not assume that you have had all the experiences that the text is pointing you towards. In fact, my whole argument is that you will use the text to arrive at that experience, not already be armed with that experience and then try to reproduce it in your words. So that's the objective of reading it. That's why we want everyone to read. So anyone who can actually feel in their bodies and their heads and their hearts something of what the writer has gone through or is going through or is trying to say is the whole point. And I'm not sure how much in the act of translation your being a Kulin Brahmin plays a role. I mean, I know it brings you a lot of privileges that you would not have had even today. Most certainly, you cannot wish away that identity, but it won't make you a better translator.
So in our, I'm just summing it up. In our discussion, because you said the text leads you towards wherever you have to reach, I just wanted to understand, is there a difference between the languages used by the marginalized and the languages used by the non-marginalized? So in that way, the text is leading you at different.
Of course, absolutely. Language is very central to the literary expression of any writer anywhere, whether they're marginalized or whether they're in the center of things, right? So it's absolutely crucial.
I just wanted to add something about this prize, which the translation of Kalyani. The book has not been published in India. How do the layman reader get to it? Who's going to, except for a few libraries, go and buy it? Until and unless some Indian reprint does it done. This happened, I know very well, with my own book, A Bengali Lady in England, which no one got to read, and someone else translated it, and Kiriti published the same novel, same text, which now sells. I did it in 2015, many years ago. So it is also a politics of giving award to this niche area of Dalit studies now, that these, I'm not going into the politics of even giving awards as whom it to be given, but that this book was published abroad and not in India, when so much of Dalit writing is now in syllabus, in text, that this award was given outside from a publication done outside India. This also raises another question of getting hold of a text and which text gets the highlight. And now that it has got an award, you will be trying, the serious scholars might try it and locate it. So this is also another problem, marketability.
By the way, just as a matter of information, her co-translator is in fact, his name is Mrinmoy Pramanik, and at least technically he belongs to the same group of people, same social group.
I'm saying the book.
No, I know. I was just talking about the translators. But of course, he's a professor in JNU now, and I dare say he will be the first to admit that his life is not very different from that of other elites of different castes.
So, Madhumita, we go for lunch.
We will go for lunch and we assemble back at before 2:30 is what Chandra says. So we have about 35 minutes. Thank you.